Okay, today we're going to talk about Putin needs a pope. As you know, there is a conclave coming up on May the 7th, and there will be a new pope chosen probably next week. What I want to talk about is an article that appeared in The Guardian, and it was written by J. Oliver Conroy, and it appeared April 28th. And it's entitled MAGA Catholics Are Gaining Ground in the U.S. Now Their Sight is Set on the Vatican. Conservative U.S. Catholics like Steve Bannon look to win, quote, war that lasts decades, end of quote, with Pope antithetical to Francis, end of quote. Okay, there's a lot in that title of the article. Let me start with war that lasts decades. Okay, this is a reference, I believe, to a book written by Benjamin Teitelbaum that came out in 2020, and it is called War for Eternity. It is a study of the philosophy and somewhat of the life of Steve Bannon. And it documents how Steve Bannon became a traditionalist. And traditionalism is this belief system that is sometimes called perennialism. It supposedly consists of beliefs that have been held since the beginning of time, that have been forgotten over time or covered over time, and the world has devolved, and the world needs to get back to those beliefs and those ideas. Okay, those ideas, those beliefs, those ideals are contravention to the liberal order, which is democracy, rule of law, human rights. Okay, and what happens in this book by Teitelbaum is he depicts Bannon as somebody who definitely wants to destroy America. He wants to do away with these ideals. He wants to make America just an ethnic construct. And that is why Bannon has done what he has done in appealing to people's fear and anger. And he was Trump's campaign manager in 2016, and he played a very important role in getting Trump elected, obviously. Um, so Teitelbaum also, in explaining Bannon, also explains, and I'm still reading the book, also explains the connection between Bannon and Putin. And Bannon sees Putin as a traditionalist like him, and Bannon thinks that Russia and the U.S. should unite against China. Now, when Teitelbaum describes this scene where Dugin and Bannon are talking about this, you kind of get the sense that Putin really isn't with him on that. Okay, that Putin is advancing, and I mean, sorry, that Dugin is advancing another agenda. Okay, so Bannon and Dugin are talking. If I said Bannon and Putin, that's wrong. So it's Bannon and Dugin are talking, and they're talking about the United States and Russia working together against China. Okay, and that is what Bannon says we need to do because we're the same civilization. We're all traditionalists, right? Right, Mr. Dugin, and so on and so forth. Well, um, that is supposedly a very important animating factor in Bannon's pro-Russia viewpoint and in the pro-Russian viewpoint of Trump and his administration, even though U.S. statute says that Russia is an adversary. Okay, so Dugin, okay, Dugin has his own ideology, and as Belmont writes, I'm sorry, as Catherine Belton writes in Putin's People, um, Dugin's ideology has played a very important role with Putin and Putin's geopolitical goals. And so Belton writes Putin's KGB men had chosen an ideological rationale for the drive to restore Russian empire that resonated with those who felt left by the wayside in the tumult of globalization, as well as with base innate prejudice. So this is similar to what Bannon did. He tried to recruit people who had grievances, who felt like they had been left behind by globalization, and who had prejudices. Okay, so Belton goes on. So the KGB men turned to Alexander Dugin to propound theories of Russia's destiny as a Eurasian empire that would take its rightful place as the world's one true power as the Third Rome. They had been grasping for an ideology that would unite their allies against the liberal West, and Putin had long been discussing these ideas and those of other exiled white Russian imperialists with money men. Konstantin Malofeev is a pro-Putin supporter and imperialist. He said, this is a civilizational project that arose because their background, their understanding of the past and the future of the country. Putin spoke a lot with them about these things. So the KGB had dabbled, in Belton writes, in cultivating Russia's far-right nationalist and imperialist groups ever since the Soviet collapse, but after Ukraine's Orange Revolution in late 2004, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, they were pulled from the fringes, slowly gaining access to a steady stream of finance. And what they were doing, as she writes, is that Russia could seek to expand its activities into disrupting and dividing the West. Russia is trying to create turbulence in the EU through supporting far-right political movements, said Ukraine's Western-leaning Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk in early 2015. Okay, so what is going on with Putin is he's trying to destabilize the West, meaning the countries of Europe and the United States. He does that by playing on things like nationalism, like grievances, okay? And he wants to break the United States away from Europe. He wants to dissolve NATO. He wants Europe broken down into a bunch of little squabbling nation states where nobody's strong, nobody can work together. That's what's behind nationalism, okay, as we see it now. It's the Russians. The Russians are playing up these grievances. Now, one of the tools that they use to advance it is called black cash. And Belton does an incredible job of documenting this. I don't want to get into it a lot now. I don't mean to imply that Bannon is getting this black cash. I don't know. But black cash is a way that the KGB or other intel agencies, the Russians, work with Russian organized crime to get money under the radar into the West, to buy people, to corrode institutions, set up companies, whatever has to happen, to make things happen, to promote people, to promote causes, to help people who are favorable to Putin. So it's a very important idea. Okay, so with this as a backdrop, let's go back to this article. Okay, we know that Bannon was very involved with MAGA. He's been called the spiritual godfather of MAGA. And these are the Americans who are unhappy. They feel left behind. They got grievances, and they want to change things. And so they've been weaponized against their own country, against their own ideals, against their own beneficial national and world order. And national, I mean country order. Okay, because national has two meanings. One means national like the political entity, national like the ethnic identity. Putin is pushing nationalism, the ethnic identity. Okay. But that's what is a problem with a lot of these movements, is because they're being backed by Putin one way or another, or certain people who promote these movements are being backed by Putin or another, and usually it's through black cash. But like I said, I don't know about Bannon. So let's get back to the article. The conclave starts May 7th, and according to the article, we will see competing factions of Catholics, including many lay people, campaigning in the Vatican and the U.S. to influence the Church's future. Okay, none with more urgency than those discontented with France's liberal reign. I mean, this is the same thing in the United States being transplanted to the Church, and actually it's been going on for a long time. But now it's starting to make more sense. Now Putin needs a pope. And so this is a way not just to hobble the church, but maybe to get himself a pope who's favorable to his agenda. Okay, so for conservative traditionalists or self-described Orthodox Catholics fresh from 12 uneasy years under Francis, this interregnum will be the last change in a long time to try to reset a church that they believe has drifted too far left. To some, that means pushing for a church that clearly affirms polarizing but long-time Catholic teachings on sexuality, marriage, and abortion. See, these culture war issues, these abortion, gay marriage, all these issues were hot button topics with Catholics, so that was the focus. And the Catholics defined themselves by these issues, where you stood on these issues. And they forgot most everything else. And these issues were grievance machines. They were used to create grievances with the Catholics, okay? And to create a group, Orthodox, conservative, traditionalists, who had grievances. Not just against their own country, but also against their own church. Okay. All right. So others, many of them associated with the priorities of Donald Trump and his supporters, would go further, and they would press for a church that is explicitly politically right wing, or at least less hostile to the MAGA movement's stances on immigration, social welfare, and the environment. Okay. Steve Bannon, perhaps the most public and inflammatory voice of right wing Catholic discontent, has said that he intends to organize a show of force of traditionalists with confrontational, wall to wall media coverage. Most politicking ever will take the form of quieter wheeling and dealing. Okay, all right. So he's doing in the church what he did in the United States. Okay. So where does all this lead? Where does all this nationalism, as somebody, told me forcefully the other day they were? They said, I'm a nationalist and you're blah, blah. He started to curse me out. And so where does all this lead? It leads to tyranny. Okay. You'll have your, like I said before, you'll have your religion. You'll have your ethnicity. You can eat your ethnic food and dance around in your costumes and go to Latin mass, but you're slowly going to be ground into the dirt because you're going to lose your human rights and you're going to lose your dignity as a person. And Bannon's fine with that. And a lot of people don't understand that this is where it's going with these tyrants like Putin and like Orban in Hungary. And Ann Applebaum wrote an article for the Atlantic. Can't think of the name of it right now, but it describes methodically how Orban did this and how slowly he did that. And we're seeing this now with Trump. And what they do is, yeah, they please the grievance machine for a while. Their base is happy, but then what happens is everybody just gets poorer, more divided. Things just worsen. It is not a good thing because you're under a tyrant who is going to use public opinion and other things against you and the force of the state against you ultimately for having the wrong opinion. So even though Elon Musk was screeching, free speech all last year, they don't want free speech. They don't want. They're going to shut down free speech. That's why Trump is taking away the funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcaster. He's trying to, and that's why he's attacking all of these newspapers, all these media outlets that don't say what he wants them to say. Okay, so this is what you're dealing with, and the Catholics have been brought along with this project in large measure, and now they're being brought along in the church to bring in a pope. Okay, to bring in a pope who's going to be sympathetic to Putin, or so they think. So the article mentions several conservatives: Burke, Sarah, Erdo, Mueller. I don't know who it's going to be. I go to Poly Market because Poly Market picked Trump right, and they picked Carney in Canada. I mean, correctly. So Poly Market has at the top four. It's Pereline Tegels from the Philippines. Pereline is the Secretary of State. Tegels from the Philippines. Turkson, I believe he's from Ghana. And then Zupi, and then Erdo. Okay, and then like I said, Burke, Sarah, Mueller. I mean, they're just way down there. Last time I checked, 2% or lower. Erdo, I think is around 5 or 7%. So these are the guys that are in the top. And so I listen to the trolls on social media, and they whisper to me. They whisper little things to me sometimes, and you kind of get a sense of what the trolls want. And if you kind of know what the trolls want, well, you kind of have an idea probably what Putin wants. So they kept pushing Sarah, Cardinal Sarah, and Sarah has made a number of comments over the years. Gerald Salyer in Crisis from April of 2022, April 13, 2022, wrote an article called The Ignored Views of Cardinal Sarah on Russia and the West. And Sarah, of course, is considered traditionalist, but he's also considered anti-globalist, pro-Putin, and says that the West has its own problems. Well, that plays in with, Putin's information warfare. It plays in with his geopolitical goals. It plays in with his disinformation goals. So yeah, Sarah would be a great candidate for Putin, but he's around 2%, and I think dropping the last time I looked. But the trolls like him, so you know that's probably what Putin wants. Then you got Cardinal Turkson. He's like number three. Okay, and he's an interesting character. There was an article that came out from the Rio Times yesterday. I believe it was the 1st of May, called Peter Turkson, Ghana's Cardinal at the Center of the Church's Global Shift. Okay, so the article explains that he was an envoy to Ukraine. He criticized harsh anti-LGBTQ laws. He's with the Dicastery for Integral Human Development. He says we have to respect local cultures. And he's spoken about world financial reform. Okay, so this is important. World financial reform and respecting local cultures. Okay, this is important because these are two themes that the Russians have repeatedly brought out. During the United Nations General Assembly in September of last year, one thing we heard a lot of, even from, I believe, the Secretariat of the UN, was this need for financial reform, okay, to help with the development of countries. And there was a lot of discussion of that. I believe there may have even been some resolutions on that. But that is a very important issue. That is also something that Russia was talking about last fall in September at the UN. Then respecting local cultures. This can be code. This can be code for anti-human rights. And what that means is that when you respect local cultures, you don't have anything to do with what happens inside of countries. China doesn't want that. They want to deal with the Rohingyas, and however they want to. Russia wants to deal with its dissidents and whatever minor groups it's got, however they want to. And there are articles about there are ethnic minorities in Russia that are being regularly picked upon and beaten up and so on and so forth. They don't want the West coming in or anybody coming in for that matter and telling them you got to treat people right. But see what they don't want human rights, and they don't want this idea of intervention. And see, this idea of intervention really, I believe, is traceable all the way back, to the Catholic Church, to the Catholic lawyers who wrote about international law and said, if there's a tyrant and you're destroying other people, other countries can come in to help them. This was an idea that also found a place in Emer de Vattel's work, Law of Nations, which the American founders read and took to heart. Okay, and this is an idea that now is new in the international community, especially with the R2P resolution, what's been called the R2P resolution in the UN from 2005. So you're seeing there Turkson seems to enunciate a couple of themes that could be favorable to the Russians, to Putin. So who's it going to be? I don't know. I honestly don't know who it's going to be, but that is something we need to be aware of. So let's talk about Bannon some more. So the article in The Guardian talks about Bannon some more. It says Bannon attacked Pope on his war room, which I'm sure you all know about, calling him a Marxist globalist illegitimate. Bannon has created a ready audience among a demographic that the New York Post has coined MAGA Catholics. Catholic Americans who are militantly conservative, both theologically and politically. Okay? So, they help Trump and gonna, help whoever, conservative, or help some pope get in who's conservative, whose views can be used or helpful to Putin. Okay. Bannon outlined numerous grievances. Here we go. It's the grievance machine. Among his arguments that the Pope was hostile to the old-fashioned Latin Mass liturgy beloved by some American Catholics. So see, the Latin Mass liturgy is a rallying point for this grievance machine to create division in the church so as to help implement Putin's designs, which is to divide the church and get a fifth column in the church, like he's got a fifth column over here in the United States, that will advance or be sympathetic to him or advance his ideas, advance his agendas. So, among his arguments that the Pope was hostile to the old-fashioned Latin Mass liturgy, beloved by some American Catholics, did not hold alleged abusers and the clergy fully accountable, very emotional, muddled long-standing doctrines about sexuality and marriage, again, key area in most Catholics, theology, are issues of sex, marriage, abortion, family. That seems to be the key area for a lot of people, and that is to the detriment of learning more about the faith and learning more that is important. So they're limited and they get weaponized by these issues. Okay. Undermined U.S. sovereignty by celebrating mass immigration and betrayed persecuted Christians abroad by allowing the Chinese Communist government control over the church there. Bannon said he will burn in hell just for that. Okay, so Bannon has created a list of grievances: the Latin Mass, sex abusers not held accountable, uh, doctrines about sexuality and marriage, mass immigration was not denounced by Francis, betrayed persecuted Christians abroad, and worked with the Chinese Communist government. So these are the grievances that the MAGA Catholics have that are being weaponized by Bannon, by others, and these grievances, this weaponization, it's going to help Putin and his global objectives. It may even get a pope in there who is maybe ambivalent towards Putin and Putin's global designs and will help tear down the liberal order, which brought a lot of peace and prosperity to the world. So Bannon has created a fifth column, and this is what he is energizing before the conclave. See if the MAGA Catholics can get their pope in like they got in their president. There was an article that came out in Forbes on April 21, the day the Pope died. It's called Faith Foes, Pope Francis Fight with the Catholic Right. And it's worth reading. I'm sorry, I said Forbes. I think it's Barron's. It is worth reading. Francis, and it talks about Francis' efforts against this conservatism that he's decried that's in America. And so as you read these articles, you get the sense that, Francis could very well have been fighting this Russian influence that is now composed of the MAGA Catholics, and that is part of, at least, the identity of at least part of the Catholics in America, this activated, militant, politically and theologically motivated people who want to change things and bring things to be more traditional. So that's what's going on. That's all I got. I've spoken longer than what I wanted to. Um, Putin needs a pope, and Steve Bannon is helping him. I will be doing a program later, hopefully in the next few days, about this black cash because I think it's very important. And like I said, I don't know if Bannon's getting the black cash, but I'll tell you some things about how it works. That's all I got. Thanks. Bye.